Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about active and passive voice. Okay, now you've probably heard of tense when we talk about verbs, right? Whether something is in past, present, or future tense. But there's a lot of other things with verbs too, and voice is one of them. Okay, so voice is either going to be active or passive for verbs. Okay, and active voice is the one that we see most often, and that's when the subject of the verb is the one doing the action. So, for example, Kobe dunked on LeBron. Okay, dunked is in the active voice. Okay, Kobe, the subject, is actively doing that. Right? Now, passive voice is when the subject is getting the action done to it. Okay, and when we make passive voice, we use a form of the verb to be plus the past tense of an action verb. Okay, so for example, Kobe was dunked on by LeBron. So here, the subject of the sentence is Kobe, but he's not the one doing the dunking. Okay, now we only decide whether a sentence is an active or passive voice if it has an action verb in it, so this doesn't apply when we're talking about just linking verbs. Okay. Now, the reason we care about whether something is an active or passive voice is because, in general, we want to use active voice in our writing, okay? And that's because active voice is just kind of more interesting to read than passive voice, okay? Now, passive voice is okay sometimes, all right? It is okay to use passive voice if you don't know who did the action, okay? So if I say the paper was ripped, like I just find a ripped piece of paper, I don't know who ripped it, that's fine because I don't know who actually performed that action, so it's okay for me to leave it in passive voice, okay? However, if I say the paper was ripped by Mrs. McAllister, I know who ripped the paper, so there's no reason to word it that way, okay? So it's better to rewrite in active voice as Mrs. McAllister ripped the paper. Okay, now, down here, what I want to do is find our subject and our verb, okay? If it's active, we're just going to say active and move on. It's good to go, okay? If it's passive, but it's a good use of the passive voice, like we don't know who performed the action, so we can't rewrite it, we'll just say passive and correct and move on. Now, if it is not a correct use of the passive voice, we're going to say passive and we're going to rewrite it, okay? So let's look at number 1, right? Tony makes dinner every night. Okay, so first thing we need to do is underline and label the verbs and circle the subject. So our subject is going to be Tony. So let's go ahead and circle him. And then the verb that goes with our subject is makes. Okay, so now I want to know if this is active or passive. So I basically want to ask myself, is my subject the one that's performing the action, or is the action being done to my subject? Okay, and in this case, I see that the subject, Tony, is performing the action of making dinner. Okay, so this one is active, so we're just going to leave it alone. Okay. All right, number 2, a large fish was caught by Robin. Right. Now, again, I want to find my subject and my verb. Okay, so my subject is going to be the large fish. So let's go ahead and circle that. All right, and then my verb is going to be was caught. So let's underline that. Okay, so now, again, I want to ask myself, is my subject actually performing the action, or is the action being done to it? And in this case, the action is being done to it. The fish didn't catch itself, okay? So I know that it's passive, so I'm going to go ahead and write that. So now I want to know, is it okay to use passive here? So looking at it, I see that we say it was caught by Robin. So I know who caught the fish, so there's no reason to word it this way, okay? So I'm going to rewrite it, and you need to do the same thing and say, Robin caught the large fish. Okay. All right, now let's look at number 3. The teacher was called to the office. So my subject is going to be teacher, so let's circle that. Was called is going to be my verb, so let's underline that. All right, and now I want to ask myself if this is passive or active. So the teacher, my subject, isn't the one doing the calling. They're the ones being called. So it's going to be passive voice. Okay, but looking at it, I don't know who's calling them to the office, so I'm not going to be able to rewrite it. So I'm just going to say passive, correct. We're going to assume that no one knows who called them to the office. Okay. All right, number 4, the webs were carefully spun by the spider. All right, so my subject is going to be web, so I want to circle that. We always want to start with subject and verb. All right, verb is going to be were carefully spun. Carefully is not really one part of our verb phrase there, but were spun. Okay, and then I want to ask myself if my subject is performing the action or not, which in this case it's not. The webs aren't spinning themselves. Okay, so I'm going to say that it is passive. And I'm going to see if I can rewrite it. I have the spider, so I know who spun the webs. So I'm going to say the spider carefully spun the webs. Okay, so now I want y'all to take a second and look at number 5, and I want you to underline the verb and circle the subject and figure out whether it is passive or active. Okay, hopefully you said that it was subject test, verb is being handed out, and that this is a passive sentence. Now, we can't rewrite this one because we don't know who is doing the action, okay? But if we did, we would want to rewrite it to make it active voice, right? So the main thing you want to think about with passive and active voice is making your own writing more active. Okay, so we don't want to use passive voice unnecessarily. We want to use active as much as possible just because it makes our writing usually clearer and usually a little bit more interesting to read.